Walk into almost any conversation today, scroll through social media, or even watch mainstream news, and the evidence is undeniable. Critical thinking is vanishing. It is not just a rare skill, it is becoming a relic. People no longer analyze, question, or probe deeper. Instead, they react, echo, and repeat. What we are witnessing is not merely ignorance, it is a mass, collective decline in the ability to reason. A psychological epidemic that has infiltrated societies, workplaces, and even private households. The rise of collective stupidity is not accidental. It is engineered, nurtured, and amplified, and its consequences are far more dangerous than most realize. Human beings are wired for thought, for curiosity, for questioning the world around them. Yet from a young age, the structures that were meant to cultivate intelligence systematically suppress it. Schools, workplaces, media, and social norms reward obedience, conformity, and speed of reaction over depth of analysis. Questions are punished when they challenge authority. Silence is encouraged when insight might disrupt the comfortable illusions of the majority. Over time, this conditioning doesn't just reduce intelligence, it rewires it. People learn to prioritize group approval over personal insight, memorization over understanding, and emotion over evidence. What remains is a mind that is technically functional but intellectually neutered, capable of repeating facts without ever interrogating them, capable of following the herd without ever seeing the precipice. The mechanisms that fuel this disappearance are subtle yet overwhelming. Social media platforms amplify emotion and outrage because human attention responds instinctively to dramatic cues. Algorithms reward content that provokes rather than informs, creating feedback loops where reaction replaces reflection. In public discourse, outrage often substitutes for argument. Viral memes replace structured thought. As a result, people increasingly mistake virality for truth, consensus for correctness, and popularity for intelligence. Entire populations begin to move in lockstep, not because they are informed, but because they are compelled to conform. The herd becomes self-reinforcing, and dissent is either ridiculed, ignored, or silenced. This decline is further accelerated by cultural forces that elevate convenience over contemplation. The modern obsession with speed, multitasking, and constant stimulation leaves little room for deep reasoning. Critical thinking requires time, patience, and solitude, the ability to wrestle with uncomfortable ideas without immediate reward or approval. But a distracted mind is a malleable mind, easily shaped by propaganda, advertising, and peer pressure. People no longer pause to question. They scroll, they share, they react. Intelligence, once an active pursuit, has become passive consumption. Psychologists and philosophers have long warned about this dynamic. Carl Jung described the collective unconscious as a force that can dominate individuals, especially when societal norms suppress independent thought. Gustave Le Bon, in his study of crowds, argued that intelligence diminishes when individuals operate as part of a mass. Modern society, with its global connectivity and constant social pressure, is the ultimate crowd, a digital, emotional, reactive swarm that moves as one. Critical thinking cannot survive in a swarm. It is inherently solitary, reflective, and at times, uncomfortable. To think critically is to resist the current, and few are willing to pay the social or emotional cost. Even our educational institutions, which should be the primary defenders of reason, contribute to the decline. Students are taught to pass tests, memorize procedures, and achieve grades. Rarely are they taught how to interrogate evidence, analyze arguments, or cultivate intellectual independence. From childhood, they are trained to comply, not question, to succeed in standardized metrics, not to wrestle with complexity. By the time they enter adulthood, many carry the habits of unthinking obedience. They have learned to equate conformity with competence, repetition with truth, and convenience with wisdom. In addition, the decline of critical thinking is exacerbated by social pressures and fear of ostracism. People have always been social animals, wired to seek approval from peers and avoid rejection. But in an era where online visibility equates to social currency, the need for approval has intensified. Speaking against the prevailing narrative invites ridicule, attack, or cancellation. As a result, independent thinkers self-censor, often before they even articulate their ideas. This widespread self-censorship creates a feedback loop. When dissenting voices disappear, the appearance of consensus becomes stronger, reinforcing obedience and diminishing critical inquiry. The consequences of this collective intellectual erosion are profound. Societies with declining critical thinking become more susceptible to manipulation, propaganda, and authoritarian control. Complex problems are oversimplified, and decisions are driven by emotion rather than reason. Economies, politics, and cultures can be steered by superficial trends and viral sentiments rather than thoughtful analysis. Innovation slows, creativity is stifled, and the very foundations of freedom, rational judgment, debate, and reasoned dissent, erode. The decline is not always obvious to those experiencing it, which makes it all the more insidious. Most people, trapped in cycles of distraction, emotional reaction, and conformity, genuinely believe they are informed and thinking, while in reality, they are operating as part of a collective hypnosis. Yet there is hope, though it is rare. Critical thinking is not lost entirely. It survives in those who resist the pressure to conform, who embrace solitude, questioning, and discomfort. True thinkers learn to separate their judgments from the herd, to weigh evidence independently, and to value truth over approval. They practice intellectual courage, constantly interrogating their assumptions, seeking clarity amidst noise, and tolerating uncertainty in pursuit of understanding. But these individuals are increasingly isolated. They are the exception in a society where collective stupidity has become the default mode. The rise of collective stupidity is not merely an intellectual concern, it is a survival concern. A population unable to think critically is a population unable to recognize manipulation, to discern fact from fiction, or to make informed decisions in moments of crisis. The dangers are not abstract, they are immediate and real. And yet, the forces that erode reasoning, fear, distraction, conformity, emotional manipulation, are powerful and pervasive. To live consciously in such an environment is to constantly resist, to exercise vigilance, and to cultivate independent thought against overwhelming odds. Critical thinking is disappearing not because humans are inherently incapable, but because society has created conditions that reward obedience, reaction, and emotional conformity over reflection, curiosity, and reasoning. Awareness of this decline is the first step toward reclaiming autonomy. Those who refuse to surrender their minds to collective stupidity find themselves in the position of outsiders, often mocked, misunderstood, or feared, but also uniquely capable of seeing clearly in a world of confusion, navigating complexity while others remain trapped in simplicity, and preserving the rarest of human capacities: the ability to think independently, rigorously, and courageously. Look around, and it's impossible to ignore. Intelligence is no longer the currency of society. Observation, analysis, independent thought, they are vanishing quietly, almost imperceptibly, replaced by instinctive reaction, emotional echo, and blind conformity. Critical thinking is not just rare, it is endangered. The majority of people today do not question what they see, hear, or read. They absorb it, repeat it, and defend it as truth, no matter how absurd or contradictory it may be. This is not ignorance, this is mass programming. This is the rise of collective stupidity, a psychological epidemic with terrifying implications, and most people are entirely unaware they are infected. The machinery behind this collapse is both ancient and modern. From the moment a child enters the classroom, systems are in place to suppress curiosity, obedience is rewarded, and deviation punished. Grades, schedules, bells, and standardized tests are not neutral. They are instruments of mental conditioning. They teach the child, do not question, do not explore beyond the boundaries, do not think independently. And the lesson is internalized so deeply that by adulthood, it operates invisibly. The obedient worker, the loyal citizen, the unquestioning consumer, these are the products of decades of conditioning. Nietzsche called this the domestication of man. The child who once questioned everything has been transformed into a replica, capable of functioning within the herd, incapable of seeing the ropes that bind them. Modern society has perfected this conditioning. Social media, mainstream news, and corporate messaging are the new classrooms. But instead of facts, they deliver fear, outrage, and emotional hooks. Virality has replaced logic. Likes, shares, and retweets reward emotional reaction, not reasoning. Critical thought is slow, uncomfortable, and often unpopular, so it disappears. People no longer analyze, they echo. They don't debate, they perform. Entire populations have learned to mistake emotional contagion for truth, consensus for wisdom, and social approval for intelligence. The result is a digital herd, moving as one, driven not by reason, but by unconscious mimicry. The consequences are profound. Manipulation becomes effortless, and power gravitates to those who can exploit the herd's blind obedience. Even education, which should be humanity's defense against mental slavery, participates in the decay. Schools prioritize memorization, compliance, and performance metrics over inquiry, critical questioning, and reflection. Intelligence becomes a measure of obedience, not insight. From childhood, people are trained to seek validation from authority, to fear standing out, to avoid the discomfort of doubt. By the time adults leave school, they have already internalized a life script. Follow rules, do not question, survive socially. Individual thought, the spark of genius, is smothered before it ever has a chance to burn. The social environment further amplifies this effect. People are terrified of rejection, ridicule, and isolation. Speaking truth in a world addicted to simplicity and consensus becomes a dangerous act. Most minds self-censor before the herd even notices dissent. As a result, the herd appears unanimous, consensus seems universal, and obedience spreads silently. This is the perfect environment for manipulation. Control the narrative, manipulate emotion, and the masses move as one without resistance. The rise of collective stupidity is not an accident. It is a predictable outcome of social engineering, amplified by fear, distraction, and conformity. The consequences are immediate and insidious. Societies that lose critical thinking lose the ability to discern truth from fiction, reason from propaganda, and opportunity from illusion. Decisions are made based on viral trends and emotional reactions, not evidence or reflection. Innovation stalls, creativity is stifled, and the very foundation of freedom, rational judgment, is eroded. Yet most people live in ignorance of this collapse, convinced that their reactions, opinions, and decisions are rational. The herd does not recognize its own slavery because it has been trained to mistake obedience for intelligence. But even within this sea of mediocrity, the potential for independent thought survives. Critical thinking is not extinct. It exists in those who resist, who question, who cultivate solitude, curiosity, and intellectual courage. These are not popular traits. They are uncomfortable, dangerous, and often isolating, but they are the last defense against mental captivity. A mind that refuses to obey the herd sees clearly in a world clouded by imitation, instinct, and manipulation. It recognizes patterns the crowd cannot, discerns truth amidst noise, and navigates complexity while the majority stumbles blindly. The modern epidemic of stupidity is not random. It is deliberate. It is nurtured by systems that reward obedience, amplify emotion, suppress reflection, and punish deviation. Critical thinking is disappearing because society has perfected the art of producing compliant, reactive, emotionally driven humans, efficient, manageable, predictable. Those who resist are rare, often vilified, and frequently misunderstood. Yet they carry the only weapon capable of piercing the fog: clarity of mind, independence of thought, and the courage to question everything. Living in a world dominated by collective stupidity is dangerous, not only for society, but for anyone who values freedom. A population incapable of thinking critically can be manipulated, controlled, and exploited with terrifying ease. And yet, this same world offers an opportunity: awareness. Once you recognize the mechanisms at play, the emotional contagion, the herd instinct, the reward of conformity, you gain the power to resist, to step outside the swarm, to reclaim the ability to think independently, analyze rigorously, and act strategically. Those who do so not only survive, They gain power in clarity, influence in understanding, and freedom where others are trapped. Critical thinking is not disappearing because humans are inherently incapable. It is disappearing because the environment, the systems, and the social pressures have created a world in which obedience, imitation, and emotional reaction are rewarded, while reflection, questioning, and insight are discouraged. Understanding this is the first step. Cultivating it is the challenge. Mastering it is the rare act of defiance in a world addicted to mental submission. In resisting the herd, questioning the narratives, and reclaiming independent thought, you step into a space where most will never enter. The arena of clarity, agency, and real intelligence. The realm of the few who think while the rest follow blindly. The first truth you must accept is uncomfortable. The world is not designed to foster independent thought. It thrives on obedience, repetition, and herd behavior. Critical thinking is no longer the default. It has become a dangerous act. Questioning what everyone else accepts, analyzing uncomfortable truths, or forming your own conclusions can make you an outsider, even a target. This is exactly why cultivating your own mind is no longer optional. It is survival. To resist the collective stupor, you must first understand how it manipulates you. Social conformity is reinforced not just externally, but internally. Most people do not realize that their opinions, their fears, and even their values are echoes of external influence. Every habit, from scrolling news feeds to repeating viral opinions, reinforces the herd's control. Awareness of this mechanism is the first step toward reclaiming intellectual sovereignty. Once you recognize the trap, the next step is developing independent judgment. This requires rigorous self-questioning. Why do I believe this? What assumptions underlie this opinion? Is this fear or fact driving my decision? Nietzsche would call this a confrontation with yourself, a willingness to stand alone in pursuit of truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Schopenhauer warned that most individuals never reach this stage because the conditioning that begins in childhood has instilled a fear of solitude and uncertainty. True critical thinking demands both courage and discomfort. It is an act of rebellion against decades of programmed obedience. Solitude becomes a weapon in this struggle. In a world drowned in noise and distraction, reflection is rare and isolation is feared. Yet only through silence can you begin to untangle the web of conditioning. Walk alone. Observe without judgment. Write down your thoughts. Challenge them repeatedly. Question every narrative you have internalized. This is the laboratory in which independent thinking is forged. The herd cannot see into your mind, and this privacy is your only true advantage. Another essential step is selective consumption of information. The modern environment bombards you with stimuli designed to provoke reaction rather than reflection. Social media, news, and entertainment are engineered to capture attention, manipulate emotion, and reward conformity. To reclaim your mind, you must become a curator of your own intellectual diet. Seek ideas that challenge you. Read sources that contradict your beliefs. Engage with concepts that are uncomfortable. The goal is not to adopt every idea as truth, but to exercise discernment, to weigh evidence independently, and develop clarity amidst chaos. Equally important is questioning authority and social norms. From childhood, obedience has been drilled into you. The school system rewarded compliance, society applauds conformity, and digital culture punishes dissent. To break free, you must actively interrogate what you are told. Authority is not inherently right. Popularity is not inherently truth. Emotional consensus is not inherently wisdom. Nietzsche would argue that the highest human potential is realized only when you step outside the herd, rejecting the safety of the familiar for the risk of insight. This is uncomfortable, isolating, and often misunderstood, but it is the crucible of freedom. Emotional discipline is also critical. Herd behavior is amplified by fear, outrage, and tribal instincts. When emotions govern your thinking, manipulation is effortless. Critical thinkers learn to separate emotional reaction from rational analysis. They pause before responding. They observe without immediate judgment. They evaluate motives, incentives, and hidden agendas. Mastery of emotion is not moral. It is strategic. In a world addicted to reaction, Calm analysis becomes a tool of power and survival. Finally, cultivating intellectual courage is the ultimate act of resistance. To think critically in an environment of mass stupidity is to be perpetually at odds with the herd. It is to accept isolation, challenge social pressures, and embrace discomfort as a necessary condition of clarity. Each act of independent thought strengthens the mind, builds resilience, and frees you from invisible chains. Schopenhauer and Nietzsche both understood that freedom is never granted, it is seized. You cannot wait for society to value truth over convenience. You cannot wait for the herd to think deeply. If you wish to survive, influence, and thrive in this world, you must train your mind to resist the infection of collective stupidity. Reclaiming your mind is not a theoretical exercise. It is an act of strategy. Awareness, reflection, selective consumption, questioning authority, emotional discipline, and courage form a framework to escape the herd's mental cage. The few who master this framework gain an advantage so profound that the majority cannot comprehend it. They see clearly in a fog, act deliberately in chaos, and navigate complexity while the masses stumble blindly. Intelligence is no longer a passive attribute. It becomes a weapon, a shield, and a survival tool in a world that rewards obedience and punishes insight. Those who cultivate independent thought stand outside the herd, free to perceive patterns, anticipate manipulation, and act with clarity where others are trapped in instinct, fear, and imitation. Critical thinking is no longer just a skill. It is the rarest form of power. In a world dominated by collective stupidity, the ability to think, analyze, and question is what separates those who control their lives from those who are controlled. To reclaim your mind is to reclaim agency, strategy, and freedom. The true currency in a world designed to make obedience the norm.